Welcome to UGC NET Linguistics. Topic: Sociolinguistics. Restricted and elaborated code. Restricted and elaborated code. Basil Bernstein. Basil Bernstein. Restricted code. Elaborated code. Basil Bernstein. Restricted code. Elaborated code. Restricted code. Elaborated code. Basil Bernstein. Basil Bernstein introduced the concept of restricted and elaborated code. Class, codes, and control. Theoretical studies towards a sociology of language, 1971. Theoretical studies towards a sociology of language, 1971. Basil Bernstein. Code: a set of organizing principles behind the language. Code: a set of organizing principles behind the language. Code: a set of organizing principles behind the language. A child who comes from a wrong class uses restricted code. Sorry. A child who comes from a working class uses restricted code. A child who comes from a working class uses restricted code. Lingua franca. Lingua franca. Common language of the people who know two or more languages, whereof one language is known to all. Lingua franca, common language of the people who know two or more languages, whereof one language is known to all. Code mixing and code switching. Code mixing and code switching. Applicable only to the people who know two or more languages, two or more dialects of the same language. Code mixing and code switching: when a person subconsciously switches from one language or from one dialect to another, being influenced by register, by situation, context, or choice of language. Code switching and code mixing: it refers to the linguistic behavior of a bilingual speaker who imports words phrases from language B to language A. Bilingualism. Bilingualism: ability to use two languages at the functional or fluent level. Kinds of bilingualism: 1. Coordinate bilingualism. 2. Compound bilingualism. 3. Subordinate bilingualism. 4. Balanced bilingualism. 5. Additive bilingualism. 6. Subtractive bilingualism. 7. Simultaneous bilingualism. 8. Sequential bilingualism. 9. Incipient bilingualism. 10. Dormant bilingualism. 1. Coordinate bilingualism: acquisition of two languages in different contexts For example, school and home. Compound bilingualism, acquisition of two languages in the same environment at the same time. Subordinate bilingualism, when one language is subordinate to another or another language is dormant to the first language. For example, English is subordinate to Hindi for the Hindi native speakers. They acquire English through translation. Balanced bilingualism, equally proficient in two languages. Balanced bilingualism, equally proficient in two languages. Additive bilingualism, addition of one more language in the repertoire of an individual without losing command of mother tongue. Subtractive bilingualism, subtraction of one language in acquisition of other. One loses command over minority language while learning majority language. Simultaneous bilingualism, prior to age 3, the children are exposed to more than one language at the same time and in the same environment. Sequential bilingualism, acquisition of one language after another. Incipient bilingualism, coined by Diebold, 1964. Incipient bilingualism, Diebold, 1964. Diebold, 1964. Incipient bilingualism, to develop a new language by a group of people by borrowing words from other languages. Dormant bilingualism, asleep bilingualism, sleeping bilingualism, no longer use of one language when one migrates to another country. Register. Register, when an individual uses different varieties of the same language, means dialects, depending upon situation. Register, minute to minute variation in the language of the same person. Diminutive, 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 morphological change in language to show intimacy. Diminutive, to lessen the wider spectrum of the meaning of the object or of the person. Example, name your dog after Einstein or Arnold, etc. Ellipse, clippings, telephone, phone, blendings, mechanics plus electronics, mechatronics, to show weakness of a person. For example, you are Manmohan, addressed as deaf and dumb, like former Prime Minister Sri Manmohan Singh. Augmentative, 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 morphological change in the form of a word in order to show vastness, bigness, or highness, often in size, along with in other attributes. For example, supermarket, Modi jacket, etc. Lavender linguistics, William Leap, 1995. Lavender linguistics, William Leap, 1995. William Leap, Lavender linguistics, 1995. William Leap, Lavender linguistics, 1995. Lavender linguistics, associated with the language study of gay, lesbians, transgenders, etc. Lavender linguistics, the study of the language used by LGBT and queers, Biksa and Beenam, dialects developed by gay community, Biksa and Beenam, dialects developed by gay community, Gail, Gail, Gayle, Gail, English and African based gay argot or cant slang, religious hypocrisy. Example: P.B. Shelley was charged with cant and he had to fly to Italy for his poem Revolt of Islam. P.B. Shelley was charged with cant and he had to fly to Italy for his poem Revolt of Islam. Cant, used primarily in South Africa by LGBT, lesbian, gay, transgenders, and Biksa, Beenam. Polari, a dialect spoken by LGBT in the United Kingdoms. Polari, a dialect spoken by LGBT in the United Kingdom. Language and gender. Otto Jefferson. Language and gender, concept given by Otto Jefferson. Otto Jefferson, language and gender. Otto Jefferson, language and gender. Language and gender. The woman, language, the nature and development. 1922. Otto Jefferson. Otto Jefferson's work, The Woman, Language, the Nature and Development, 1922. Worked as methodology for studying feminism in literature in the later 28th and 21st centuries. Study of women's speech in relation with the speech of men. Robin Lakoff, 1975. Language and Woman's Place. Language and Woman's Place by Robin Lakoff, 1975. Language and Woman's Place, Robin Lakoff, 1975. Women tend to linguistic forms that reflect and reinforce a subordinate role. Gender articulated. Language and the socially constructed self. Eddie Third Volume, 1995. Referred as central text in studying gender and language. Feminist stylistics and Language and Sexism, Sarah Mills, 1995. Sarah Mills, 1995. Language and Sexism, Feminist Stylistics. Sarah Mills, Language and Sexism, 1995. A methodology to study feminism in literature. Dialects have mutual intelligibility. Dialects have mutual intelligibility. Intersentential code switching. Intersentential code switching. Intersentential code switching. Intrasentential code mixing. Intrasentential code mixing. Code refers to language, not dialect. Code refers to language, not dialect. Code switching and code mixing are defined in relation to discourse. Code switching and code mixing are defined in relation to discourse. Code switching, code mixing are defined in relation to discourse. Entailment, to restrict flow of thought. Entailment, to restrict flow of thought. Entailment, logic, not cancelable. Entailment logic, not cancelable. Semantic shift, when a more general meaning is shifted to the word. For example, sandwich, previously limited in range and shifted to wider range. Sandwich, when a more general meaning is shifted to the word. Key concepts. Key concepts. Key concepts. Bilingualism. It can be property of an individual, but equally it can be the property of an entire speech community. Bilingualism, ability to speak two dialects of the same language. Code switching. Code switching, switching back and forth between two language varieties, especially in a single conversation. Code switching, switching back and forth between two language varieties, dialects, in a single conversation. Code switching can occur between languages, dialects, styles, or accents during a conversation. Situational code switching, metaphorical code switching. Black English, the distinctive varieties of English used by the native speakers of African or Caribbean origin. African American Vernacular English, Ebonics. Black English, Ebonics.